Good day, and thank you for attending this session on aging issues for people who are LGBTQ. I am Joseph Wheeler, a volunteer for SAGE Central North Carolina. SAGE Central North Carolina is part of SAGE USA, and there are about 30 affiliates across the country. One is in Raleigh, sponsored by the LGBT Center of Raleigh. Our work in Central North Carolina is around providing activities for people who are LGBTQ who are 50 years of age and older. So we reduce social isolation. We are also involved in a lot of education projects, and we do advocacy for LGBTQ seniors. A lot of the work we do is to educate professional caregivers, but today we're going to focus on family caregivers, personal caregivers, people who provide care. And I'm going to present some things which I hope will be of benefit to you in caring for the people in your life who are aging and who are LGBTQ. One of the things I'm going to say is that I am not the face, the sole face of people who are LGBTQ. I'm white, I'm male, I'm cisgender, but I also want you to keep in mind that when we talk about issues for folks that are LGBTQ, we're talking about people who are transgender, people who are non-binary. We're talking about my queer colleagues of color, people who face any number of issues beyond the issues that I face as an older gay man. So one of the things I want to talk about today, using my life as an experience, is what are some of the societal influences that older gay people have experienced in their life, in part, so if you are a person who is heterosexual and cisgender, you might understand some of the issues that have been a part of framing who we are, which I think will give you a stronger, a better understanding of how we relate to the world that we find ourselves in. So I'm going to start. I was born in 1951. I'm going to be 70 years old later this year. I'm going to start in the 1940s, when one of the greatest events that impacted LGBTQ civil rights happened. It was World War II. In World War II, a number of, particularly gay men, because we were talking about soldiers, came off the farms, came out of their little towns, and discovered that they were not the only person in the universe who was gay. And at that time, we didn't have role models, we didn't have media, and so that was a major influence on what became the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer civil rights movement. In the 1950s, the American Psychiatric Association for the first time included homosexuality. That was when they included homosexuality in the list of mental disorders. We were considered to have a psychopathic personality disorder, and at that time, immigrants were closed off from coming to the United States if they were LGBTQ, because you couldn't get into the country if you had a psychopathic personality disorder. In the 1960s, when I was a teenager, there's an icon of gay civil rights, and his name is Bayard Rustin. And my experience is when I talk about Bayard Rustin, a lot of people do not know who he is or who he was. Bayard Rustin was the right-hand person to Reverend Martin Luther King, and he helped design and organize the 1963 March on Washington. He is the person who brought nonviolent civil disobedience to Dr. King. And he was a gay man. He had been arrested. The FBI came to Reverend Dr. King and said, if you have this man organize the 1963 Civil Rights March on Washington, we are going to out him publicly. And to his credit, Dr. King said, go ahead. So, but the name of Bayard Rustin is often lost when we think about the history of the civil rights movement outside of those of us who are LGBTQ who hold him as an icon. It was in the 1960s that Christine Jorgensen had her sexual reassignment surgery, and it created news. For the first time, people actually who were not a part of a culture that understood people who were transgender, first time they became aware of that even as a possibility. The National Organization of Women at this time in the 1960s was very active around women's civil rights. And the leaders of now came to many of their lesbian colleagues and said, we want to disassociate from you. We do not want you to be a part of our messaging because having lesbians in the civil rights struggle for women holds us back. It was also at this time that Illinois became the first state in the Union to decriminalize homosexuality. So in 1969, the latter part of my teen years, the year I graduated from high school, was the Stonewall Rebellion. And that's something that many people know about because that is sometimes heralded as the beginning of the modern civil rights movement for LGBTQ people. But in fact, there were any number of other resistances that had taken place before Stonewall. And the truth is, most of us were not impacted by Stonewall immediately. It was probably in the 1980s, much later, that I actually became aware of the importance of that event when the people who were in a small bar in New York City, rousted by the police, as they had been rousted by the police time after time, said, we've had enough, and they fought back. In the 1970s, was when the American Psychiatric Association actually removed homosexuality from its list of mental disorders. As a matter of fact, a member of the American Psychiatric Association, the year before it was taken off the list of mental disorders, spoke before the body as a psychiatrist with a bag over his head, telling people, if you knew who I was, I would be thrown out of this organization. And it was in part his story that led the American Psychiatric Association to take us off the list of psychiatric disorders. And why is that important? Because up to that time, our families could have us interned. We could be subjected to many kinds of therapy without recourse. And so having that removed had an impact on many people's lives, but also it said something about who we were and who we weren't, that we weren't people with a mental disorder. However, there is still a psychiatric disorder called gender dysphoria, and many people who are transgender and non-binary have been classified under that psychiatric diagnosis. This was also the time when Harvey Milk and Mayor Moscone were assassinated in in San Francisco. Harvey Milk was the first openly gay candidate elected to an office throughout the country, and he was assassinated. You might remember that Dan Brown, the person that assassinated Harvey Milk and Mayor Moscone, was actually let off, and his defense was that he had eaten too many Twinkies and he was having a sugar rush. And so that sends a message about our value. In the 1980s, we were introduced to, at that time, what was called gay-related immune deficiency, which ultimately became AIDS and HIV disease. And as we were introduced, I remember I lived in Boston at the time, and I remember hearing two guys in a club, and one said to the other, haven't you heard what's happening in New York City? People are dying. And what happened was that we saw many, particularly gay men, because HIV is a blood-borne virus, becoming sick with a cancer called Kaposi sarcoma. And ultimately, we realized that that had to do with immune deficiency, and there were other people who had blood-borne transmission of the virus. But many of us at that time became politically active because we saw our colleagues and our friends, our brothers, going down to the disease, and we couldn't even at that time get the President of the United States to say the word AIDS. And people would talk about innocent people who innocently got the disease as opposed to how we were identified. Let's see. At this time also was the first gay games, which at that time was called the Gay Olympics. And the reason that that's important is up to that time, or shortly, for a while after that, the Gay Olympics, as it was first called, was the only Olympics that was ever sued by the International Olympics Committee because they thought associating gay with Olympics would sully the name of the Olympics. Now, I want you to know there's a Junior Olympics, there's a Special Olympics, there's even been Olympics for beetles and Olympics for rats and Olympics of the mind. Since that time, there have been some other Olympics that have been taken off the list, but at that time, LGBTQ was the first. In the 1990s, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was enacted into law. And what a lot of people don't know is that that was designed, signed in by Bill Clinton, designed to rectify the injustice of LGBTQ folks being discharged dishonorably from the service. And after Don't Ask, Don't Tell was enacted, more people were discharged from the military under Don't Ask, Don't Tell every year than in the years previously. Congress passed the Defense of Marriage Act. The United States Congress passed a law that said marriage is between only one man and one woman. You don't qualify. Your relationships are illegitimate. It was also during this time that the Supreme Court determined that Amendment 2, through Romer versus Evans, in Colorado was unconstitutional. What Romer versus Evans said is that no municipality could have any kind of law that protected the civil rights of LGBTQ people, that we didn't qualify. The Supreme Court determined that that was unconstitutional. It was also at this time that Matthew Shepard was killed, and most people know Matthew Shepard's name and the terrible way he died, but here's why I think that's important as you think about the experience of LGBTQ people. For me, he was just another young gay man who was beaten and ultimately beaten to death, that it wasn't the kind of isolated experience that I think many people thought that it was, that I don't know a gay man who hasn't had something threatening shouted at him through a car window, and particularly a moving car. I have a good friend who lives in Washington, D.C. He's Black, he's gay, and he said to me one day, you know, Joe, I feel like as a Black man, I can walk anywhere in my city and I will be safe. But as a gay man, I don't feel safe anywhere in Washington, D.C. walking down the street. And so the idea of that our lives could be in jeopardy has been a common experience for a lot of us at various times. In the 2000s, now by this time I'm in my 50s, Lawrence versus Texas struck down the sodomy law. Up to that time, the laws allowed for us to be arrested in our own homes if we were involved in sex with someone of the same sex. Massachusetts, at this time, was the first state to allow same-sex marriage. That was in 2004. 31 states after that banned same-sex marriage as a result of the civil rights improvements that were happening in various states. In 2010, the Census Bureau included same-sex marriage for the first time in the United States census. And what they found is that there were gay families living in 99% of the counties in the United States. 99% of the counties our families were living. This was a time when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed in 2011. In United States versus Windsor, they struck down the Defense of Marriage Act. And Edie Windsor is another one of our LGBTQ icons who died in the last year, if not the last 2 years. It was her case that provided the overthrow for the Defense of Marriage Act. And then in 2014, the Supreme Court determined that, it was 2015, the Supreme Court determined that marriage could legally include same-sex marriage, which made a lot of difference for many of us because up to that point, there are over 1,000 different economic benefits that were available for married people, at that point, heterosexually married people, that were not allowed for people who had same-sex marriages. And the last thing I want to talk about regarding our history is the Pulse nightclub massacre. That was the most significant destruction of LGBTQ people ever. It was more than just a killing in a nightclub, that people were sought out because they were in a nightclub. It was also Latin night, but they weren't hunted down because they were Latino. They were hunted down because they were gay. And so that's a significant memory for us to hold. So now, these are just the things that I would present that have been part of our cultural history. So then let's talk about what are the consequences of that. So I want to talk about, as we age, the differences of heterosexual folks and LGBTQ folks, cisgender folks and transgender folks, because this history that's been a part of our experience that may not have been a part of the general society history has left us with some particular kinds of concerns, characteristics, issues as we think about getting older. So I want to talk about that. And the information I provide is taken from a national survey that was done by Sage USA and another national survey that was done by AARP, known as the Dignity Survey. So here's what they found from our folks as they surveyed the people around LGBTQ issues and aging. One, we are twice as likely to live alone as our heterosexual colleagues. That we are 4 times less likely to have children. That we are much more likely to have our support system get smaller as we age than our heterosexual counterparts. You know, I think about, right now, I'm almost 70 years old. Now, when I'm 70, and my network of support is what I call a horizontal network, friends and colleagues, I call them my chosen family. They're all 70, 75, that's fine. When I get to be 85 or 90, my support network is largely to be 85 or 90 years old, as opposed to many of my heterosexual colleagues who have children and grandchildren, and that's what we call a vertical support network, where people of different ages are available to support. And I know that I'm talking to some folks who are part of those support networks. And so those of us who are LGBTQ wonder, who's going to take care of me when I'm 85? We are 5 times less likely to access senior services. Now, why would that be? One is we don't know if they're welcoming. Any of us in our age group has had some negative experiences when we have been excluded in public settings, whether that be in housing communities or in social events, et cetera. So we're less likely, for example, to go to a senior center. We also have concerns about the sensitivity of caregivers when we get to the point where we need professional caregivers. 3/4 of us have serious concerns about having adequate family and social support as we age. And keep in mind, we're dealing not just with homophobia, which is the fear or dislike of LGBTQ people. We're also dealing with heterosexism, which is about heterosexuality being considered to be better or more important than being homosexual. We're also dealing with ageism, as any older people in our society are dealing with ageism. So we fear discrimination, we fear neglect, we even are concerned about the possibility of violence. And we also have a higher percentage of us who are caregivers. 75% of the people who were surveyed by AARP and SAGE USA expect to be a caregiver at some point, and over half of us already are. 20% are unsure that we will have anyone who will be around to take care of us. We're also more concerned about having money to live on. In the 1980s, there were some marketing organizations that decided that they wanted to demonstrate that LGBTQ people was a good market to invest your money in. So they did some surveys through gay publications. And what they found was that by and large, we had fewer children, we had more disposable income, we were more willing to travel, we had lots of money. The only thing is the sample was skewed. Because here's the way a friend of mine who's African-American put it. He said, Joe, going to the magazines that they used for these samples would be like determining the wealth of people who are African-American by only using the readers of Essence. And so if what they found since then, when we've used broader groups to study, is that in fact our income and our savings tends to be lower than our heterosexual counterparts, in part because we didn't get the federal benefits, but also for many of us, our employment was either limited or even taken away, or we weren't promoted because whoever was making those decisions was uncomfortable with people who were LGBTQ. So we're more concerned about having enough money to last our lifetime compared to our heterosexual colleagues. We're more likely to experience loneliness, to not having someone care for us, to being concerned about being able to take care of ourselves. And 40% of the people 60 and older who are LGBTQ have not come out to their primary medical provider. They haven't come out as gay or lesbian to their general practitioner. And some people say, well, why is that important? Well, I think that's important because there are aspects of who I am that relate specifically to my health care that I want to be able to talk to my healthcare providers in a way that I don't have to edit myself or hide who I am. Now, for people who are transgender, there are some other kinds of issues beyond the kinds of issues that I might experience as a cisgender gay man, particularly as transgender people age. 1/3 are concerned that they will have to hide their gender to have access to suitable housing. And a higher percentage are concerned about how they will be able to hide their gender identity if they are in an assisted living or a long-term care facility, because they're afraid not just of being getting less care, but getting no care or even being in danger because of their transitioning. More than 50% are concerned that they will have to hide their identity in long-term care. 2/3 are concerned that their health care totally will be impacted by their gender identity. 3/4 are concerned that healthcare providers will not be sensitive to their needs. And almost 3/4 are concerned about hiding their gender identity. So, Of all the respondents in these surveys, 80% said they would prefer to have professional caregivers who are LGBTQ. So that's something to keep in mind as a family calls on professional caregivers. They also said that if they don't have LGBTQ caregivers, they at least want LGBTQ caregivers who are trained in sensitivity around LGBTQ issues. So again, for family members, that's something you may want to ask professional caregivers if they've had any kind of training or understanding what is their anti-discrimination policy, et cetera. And we look for LGBTQ affirming services. Now, how would we know that? We would know that by intake applications that include various options that might be beyond male, female. We also, if we see something visible, like a pride flag, there's a pride flag in my doctor's office, the office of my doctor, there's a pride flag in the front lobby. And just having that there gives me some message about what I could expect as an LGBTQ person. So here's the things that I would offer to sum up for family caregivers. I've talked a lot about our history. Why have I talked about our history? I've talked about our history because it impacts who we are. That's apart from what I would say the larger culture. My experience has been that when there are subordinated groups and dominant groups, that often the subordinated group members know a lot about the dominant group because we need to. It's just part of our experience and it's part of how we survive. But my experience is also that many members of the dominant group don't know the history, don't know the experiences of the subordinated group. And so to recognize that whoever it is that you care for, who is LGBTQ, you may not have heard all of their story. You might also need to be aware that they may have chosen to not be fully out. So there may be some conversations that they are not ready to have. And we need to let them have those conversations on their terms, having let them know that we appreciate them and we love them and we care for them and we will be there for them. And then to monitor folks who, for example, go into long-term care or go into assisted living or have home health aides. So to advocate for them to make sure that they are being treated sensitively and respectfully. And so I just want to say thank you for being a part of this presentation today, for being with us to hear this information. And know that SAGE Central North Carolina does a number of training programs for professional healthcare providers and aging specialists, and that we are willing to have conversations about how that can be part of our contribution to the aging services community. Also to know that we want to provide collegiality and camaraderie to LGBTQ people, many of whom may be experiencing isolation. Thank you, and that concludes my presentation for today.